Welcome everyone. My name is Dan Gjertson. This morning we are out here at the Urban Forestry Outreach and Research Teaching Nursery on the St. Paul campus of the University of Minnesota. And here I am going to display proper planting practices for a containerized tree. And in this case, the tree happens to be a redbud that you can see here, planted in a 7-gallon container, which is a very common way that you'll go to a nursery and find a tree to then bring home and plant in your landscape. To start off, I'd like to showcase some of the tools and supplies that I gather before I start a planting of a tree in the landscape. So to start here, I'm just going to pick up my soil knife, which I always have when doing a planting project. You'll see as we go through the process how I utilize this tool. Second, I have my hand pruners. These come in handy if there are any broken limbs or dead, dying, diseased limbs that you want to prune off of the tree before planting. And then when we get into, excavating around to find what is called the root flare, we'll get to that. Maybe there are some problematic roots that you may have to prune off, and that's where these hand pruners come in really handy. Moving right along, it's always good to have a tarp. This will house the soil and the turf as you're, prepping the hole. You're going to want to have a surface that you're putting all that material onto, so it's not just on the driveway or on the in the mulch bed, in the turf surrounding the area. So it helps keep your work site organized. Then I always like to have something that I can measure with. So you can use a tool handle. In this case, I just found a straight stake that'll help me to measure the depth of the hole. So, you can hold it up against the pot, figure out the proper depth once you've determined that, and then make a mark on that stake. So now you have this reference point for how deep you're going to dig your hole. Some more of the tools here. I've got a regular digging shovel, of course, for digging the hole. But then also, if you happen to have a balling spade or something with a shovel with the straight edge, this really helps for cutting turf. So once you've established your location and then cutting the turf in a circle, whatever radius, circle, diameter of circle you've determined to be your planting hole, well then using one of these shovels is really handy to go around that whole circle and then cut the turf. And then you can use a digging shovel to then kind of scoop that turf out. Then lastly, the supplies that I have handy that you're going to want to have on hand before planting. We've got our shredded bark mulch over here. There are many different kinds of mulch, but this is what we have on hand today. It's a great mulch to be using, something that's nice, more fine and shredded. And then of course, we've got our bucket of water here. So you can have a hose handy, but in this case, we have a jug of sufficient water for post-planting. So here are all the supplies, tools, and now we'll kind of move around, get this tree situated in our location, and then talk about the next steps. One really important topic that we're going to cover before we even start digging is safety. So, as you can see, I have proper PPE on, so these are safety glasses. You're going to want to have your eyes covered and safe. It's always good to have gloves on hand. And anytime you're digging in the landscape, you want to know if there are any underground utilities located around the area before you start digging. So, nationwide, we have a number, 811, that you can call to then line up someone to come out and locate all the underground utilities on your landscape. So I have the tree situated in the landscape where I want it to be planted. But we have a couple of steps to cover first before we even start digging a hole. First and foremost, we want to determine the depth of the hole that we're going to dig. That is determined by locating what's called the root flare on the tree. It's really common when you buy containerized stock or nursery stock that the tree may be too deep within the container. So you just have to do a little bit of digging around to then find the true root flare, to then be able to measure the correct depth that you're going to dig your hole. The soil knife comes in really handy for this step, for just moving the material away from the base of the tree until you find that root flare. So in this instance, we got lucky, and the tree is already in the pot at the correct depth. And now we're finally ready to start digging the hole. So I have my flat shovel. I'm going to go around the tree, trying to go for a hole that's about 3 times the diameter of the pot that this tree is in. And I'll just start by cutting the turf all the way around. I've just finished cutting the turf all the way around the tree. So now I can move the tree out of the way and then start removing the turf and placing it on this tarp right here. And this is a good point to talk about moving the tree. So now that we're still in the pot, you want to avoid grabbing the stem and moving the tree that way, because you can loosen the root ball. So with this containerized tree, grab on the lip of the container and just drag it or lift it away. So avoid grabbing the tree on the stem. The process of removing turf is important to not be removing soil. So you don't want to remove soil with the turf in big clods. You're trying to scrape the turf away from the planting hole, because you're going to need the soil that comes from the hole to backfill with. Oh man, nice. There's a root. Now I'm ready to start digging the planting hole. And what I like to do is to create a walk-shaped hole. So avoid going straight down on the sides. Create more of this dish from the exterior down to the bottom where the tree is going to be situated in the middle of the hole. During the process, keep reminding yourself of the depth to ensure that you don't go too deep. I'm at a good point to check my depth. And before I do that, I'll just walk around and lightly kind of tamp in the loose soil from all the digging. And now for measuring the depth, take your shovel, lay it across the hole, like so, because that's telling you what the grade is surrounding the hole. And then measure with your measuring stick. And then drop it down right in the center where you're going to place the tree, and see where you're at compared to the shovel handle. As you can see, I'm a little bit too high, so I have to dig out another inch plus from the bottom of the hole. Time to check the depth again. Now we're just where we want to be. Time to plant the tree. Removing the tree from the pot is the one instance where you're going to have to grab the stem to remove the material from the pot and place it in the hole. Sometimes trees are growing in containers for a longer period of time than you want, so they might be a little adhered to the pot. So a good tip for loosening the soil up is to go around the pot, kind of gently tapping the sides to help break up that adhesion. And now I'll grab the base of the tree, lifting it out and trying my best to keep the root ball intact. You may notice once you get the tree into the hole that it's not straight up and down. So this is the time at which you make slight adjustments before you start backfilling. So a really good way to gauge whether a tree is straight or not is to stand back away, have your shovel in hand, hold it up in the air off of the ground, and that will hang straight. And then you use that as a comparison to the stem of the tree to see which way you need to adjust. In this case, the tree is leaning to the left. So what I'm going to do to correct that is grab a little bit of soil from my pile of soil and then very gently tip the root ball a little bit. And then I'm taking the shovel and just kind of jabbing that soil underneath this side of the tree to help straighten it out. And my advice here is to do a little bit at a time, because you don't want to pack too much underneath the tree, and then you'll have to compensate by doing the same thing on the other side, and now you've kind of raised the tree up out of the hole slightly. So just make little adjustments. And now we've corrected the lean. I'm now ready to start backfilling around the tree and the hole. Something that I want to avoid is creating large air pockets, because you want good root to soil contact. So I like to do this stage in layers, where I start by putting a few shovel loads in the hole, all the way around the tree like so. So let's say that's layer number one. And now I'll flip the shovel around and I'll take the top of the handle, and I'm not compacting the soil here, I'm just tamping down the soil and getting rid of those large air pockets. Also, if you have clumps in your soil, this will help to break up those clumps. So I've gone all around, that's layer one. Now I'll just repeat the process until I've reached the top of the root ball. With backfilling complete, I have my mulch here ready to now apply a layer of mulch around the planting hole. The last step you want to do is water, because while you're working in the planting hole, you don't want to be compacting the soil. And if you had watered before doing something where you had to get into the planting hole a little bit, you'd be compacting that, because the water and soil kind of mix as a slurry. So wait for watering as the last step. And so with the mulch, you're going to want to apply a layer of 2 to 3 inches thick all the way around the planting hole, and then avoid mounding the soil or the mulch up against the base of the tree. Now the last step is watering the tree in. If you have a hose, then just doing multiple passes with the hose nozzle to ensure that the mulched area, the planting hole, is really well saturated. In this case, we have a jug, so I'll do my best to go around kind of slowly watering in the whole planting hole. I'll leave you all with a few tips for aftercare. So the tree is now in the hole. We've watered it in. It's got a good layer of mulch. You want to take off any tagging, or sometimes trees come with a stake in the pot to help support the tree while it's in the nursery. So you want to remove all this tagging because it can become problematic in the future. Stem protection is also a really good thing to have to ensure that wildlife, either rabbits or if you have deer in your area, aren't harming the tree on the stem. In this case, we have this kind of open mesh type of protector that we'll put around the stem until the tree becomes quite larger and established. And my tips for watering through the tree's establishment period is to water the tree 2-3 times a week, especially if it's not raining, which in our case, this is the perfect time to be planting a tree while it's raining. But you'll want to be supplementally watering the tree at least through the first growing season and during dry spells, maybe year 2 and 3 after the tree has been planted. So I hope you enjoyed this video and got some tips and advice for how to properly plant a tree. Now go out and plant a tree in your landscape and enjoy it for the years to come.